The blood had dried black against the weathered wood, but Ruth Cameron scrubbed anyway. Her hands shook as she worked the bristles deeper into the grain, not from the morning cold, but from something that lived deeper than her bones. The water in the bucket turned pink, then red, then something darker that reminded her of secrets she tried not to think about in daylight. She'd been at this for an hour, maybe more. Time moved strange when you were trying to wash away what couldn't be washed. The sun was climbing over the ridge now, painting the valley in shades of gold that made everything look clean, except for what she was kneeling on. "Ma'am," Ruth's head snapped up. A young woman stood at the edge of her property, clutching a carpet bag that had seen better days, maybe better years. The girl's dress was torn at the shoulder, muddy at the hem, and Ruth recognized it as one of those bright saloon dresses that looked cheerful in lamplight but showed every stain in the morning sun. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you." Ruth knew that face, one of the sweepers from McKinnon's saloon down in town. Pretty girl with dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for 19 years. Lily something. Ruth had seen her through the saloon windows when she rode to town for supplies. Always working, always quiet, always watching the door like she expected trouble to walk through it. "Child, what are you doing way out here?" Lily took a step closer, then another. Her legs were shaking. Ruth could see it even from where she knelt on the porch. "I need help." The words came out small and broken. Ruth set down her scrub brush and stood, her knees protesting. She was 45, but felt older most days, especially mornings like this when the past wouldn't stay buried. "What kind of help?" "Any kind." Lily's voice cracked on the words. She swayed on her feet, and Ruth saw the bruises then. Dark purple fingerprints around her wrists, a cut on her cheek that was trying to heal, the kind of marks that told stories Ruth knew too well. "Child, what happened to you?" "Can't go back there. Can't." The girl's knees buckled. Ruth moved faster than she had in months, catching Lily before she hit the ground. The carpet bag fell, spilling a few sad belongings across the dirt. A torn petticoat, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, a small book with pages that had been read too many times. "Easy now. I got you." Ruth half carried, half dragged Lily up the porch steps, past the bloodstains that seemed less important now. The girl weighed nothing, all bones and fear. Ruth kicked the front door open and guided Lily to the old sofa by the window. "Sit here. Don't move." Ruth went to the kitchen and pumped water into a basin. Her hands were steadier now that she had something to do besides remember. She grabbed a clean cloth and came back to find Lily staring out of the window like she expected someone to come riding up the path. "They coming after you?" "Don't know. Maybe." Ruth knelt beside the sofa and dabbed at the cut on Lily's cheek. The girl flinched but didn't pull away. "Who's they?" "People from the saloon. People who don't like it when girls leave without permission." "What kind of permission?" Lily's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee, the kind you never get. Ruth understood. She'd lived in this valley long enough to know how McKinnon's worked. Girls went in young and came out older if they came out at all. The lucky ones married and moved away. The unlucky ones just disappeared one day, and nobody asked questions because nobody wanted to know the answers. "You got family somewhere?" "No." "Friends?" "No." "Anyone who'd miss you if you stayed gone?" Lily looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes were the color of creek water after rain, clear but dark underneath. "You asking if I'm worth the trouble?" "I'm asking if you got anywhere else to go." "No, I don't." Ruth nodded and went back to cleaning the cut. It wasn't deep, but it was angry. Someone had meant to mark her. "You know who I am." "Ruth Cameron, Thomas Cameron's widow." "That's right. You know what happened to Thomas?" "Mine accident. Last winter." "That's what they say." Ruth's voice carried weight when she said it, the kind of weight that suggested there might be more to the story. Lily picked up on it. "You don't think it was an accident?" "I think a lot of things in this valley aren't what they seem." Ruth finished with the cut and sat back on her heels. Lily was watching her with those creek water eyes, looking for something. Trust, maybe, or just a reason to believe she might be safe for 5 minutes. "Why you helping me?" "Because I know what it's like to run from something that won't stop hunting." "What were you running from?" Ruth glanced toward the kitchen, where a rifle hung over the mantel, and the windows had heavy curtains that stayed drawn after dark. "Same thing you are, I expect." Men who think they own what they can't buy. Lily's shoulders sagged like she'd been holding her breath for hours, and finally let it out. I can work. I can clean and cook and mend. I don't eat much. You don't need to earn your keep here. Everyone earns their keep somewhere. Not like that. Not anymore. Ruth stood and walked to the window. The blood on the porch was still there, dark and stubborn. She'd finish scrubbing it later. Right now, she had more important things to tend to. You can stay as long as you need, but you should know something first. What? This house has seen its share of trouble. Might see more before we're done. Lily pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. I'm used to trouble. I know you are, child. That's why you're here. 3 days passed like held breath. Lily moved through Ruth's house like a ghost, learning to be solid again. She worked from dawn until dusk, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that barely needed fixing, cooking meals for 2 that could have fed 4. Her hands never stopped moving, as if stillness might make her disappear. Ruth watched from doorways and windows. The girl flinched every time the wind rattled the shutters. When horses passed on the distant road, Lily would freeze wherever she stood until the sound faded. Ruth had found the kitchen knife under Lily's pillow that first morning when she went to change the sheets. She didn't mention it. Some fears needed to be held close. You don't have to earn your keep here. Ruth said it on the 3rd afternoon, watching Lily scrub the same pot for the 4th time. The girl's knuckles were raw from the harsh soap. Everyone earns their keep somewhere. Not like that. Not anymore. Lily set the pot aside and dried her hands on her apron. Ruth had given her one of Thomas's old shirts and a plain brown skirt. The saloon dress was hanging in the back room, torn and stained but cleaned, like evidence that needed preserving. Tell me about your husband. Lily's voice was quiet but steady. Ruth poured coffee into 2 chipped cups and sat at the kitchen table. The wood was scarred from years of use. Initials carved by hands that were long buried. Thomas was a good man, quiet, worked the silver mine up in the hills for 20 years. What happened to him? Cave-in. 2 winters ago. They said the supports rotted through. Ruth's voice carried something that made Lily look up from her coffee. You don't believe that. I believe Thomas knew things that made certain people nervous. What kind of things? The kind that get men buried under tons of rock. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a hawk circled over the valley, hunting for something it couldn't see yet. How long you been at McKinnon's? Since I was 15. Where'd you come from before that? Lily's cup rattled against the saucer when she set it down. Don't remember much before, just pieces. A woman with dark hair who sang to me. A house with yellow curtains. Then nothing until I was standing in McKinnon's back room being told what my new job was. 4 years is a long time to be trapped somewhere. Not trapped, just nowhere else to go. There's always somewhere else to go. Question is whether you're brave enough to find it. Lily smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. It was small and crooked, but real. Guess I found it. Ruth was about to answer when they heard it. Hoofbeats on the dirt road getting closer. Lily went rigid, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Easy now. Ruth stood and moved to the front window. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see a man on horseback approaching the house, tall, wearing a star on his chest that caught the afternoon sun like a warning. Sheriff Brennan. The name came out like a curse. Lily was beside her now, pressed against the wall where she couldn't be seen from outside. What's he want? Nothing good. Wade Brennan rode up to the porch like he owned everything his shadow touched. He was a big man with hands that had done violence and a face that wore authority like a mask. Ruth had known him since he was a boy, pulling wings off flies behind the schoolhouse. He dismounted and tied his horse to the post Thomas had built for visitors who never came. His boots rang against the porch steps as he climbed them. Ruth waited for the knock, letting him stand there long enough to know she wasn't eager for his company. When it came, 3 sharp raps that demanded attention. Ruth counted to 10 before opening the door. She kept the chain latched and spoke through the gap. Wade. Ruth, how you been keeping? Well enough. What brings you all the way out here? Looking for someone. Young girl went missing from town few days back. Dark hair, about 19. Someone said they might have seen her heading this direction. Ruth kept her face blank as winter stone. Haven't seen hide nor hair of anyone. Been keeping to myself mostly. You sure about that? Girl's got family worried sick about her. Since when does McKinnon's girls have family? Wade's smile was sharp as broken glass. Now, Ruth, that's not a charitable way to think about our local businessmen. Charity's not something I got much of these days. Behind the door, Lily pressed herself deeper into the shadows. Ruth could feel her fear like heat radiating from a fire. Mind if I have a look around? Just to be thorough. I mind plenty. You got a warrant. Don't need a warrant to check on the welfare of my neighbors. And I don't need company I didn't invite. The silence stretched between them like a rope being tested for breaking. Wade shifted his weight, making the porch boards creak. You know, Ruth, living out here all alone, no man to protect you, lot of dangerous characters roaming these hills lately. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can. Thomas taught you to shoot, didn't he? Before his accident. The word accident hung in the air like smoke from a gun nobody wanted to claim. He did. Good. Good to know you're prepared for trouble. Wade touched the brim of his hat and stepped back from the door. You see that missing girl, you let me know. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to her. Of course. Ruth watched him mount his horse and ride away, waiting until he was just a speck on the horizon before closing and bolting the door. When she turned around, Lily was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. He knows I'm here. Maybe, maybe not. He knows. Ruth knelt beside her. Then we'll deal with it. How? Same way women have always dealt with men who think they own us. How's that? Ruth's smile was harder than Wade's had been. Very carefully. The rope was fraying. Ruth noticed it when Lily pulled the bucket up from the well, the old hemp fibers splitting where they rubbed against the stone edge. Water sloshed over the rim as Lily struggled with the weight, her sleeve catching on the rough limestone. Careful now. Ruth reached to help steady the bucket, but Lily was already pulling back, trying to free her cuff from where it had snagged. The fabric tore with a soft ripping sound, and something small and silver tumbled out, catching the morning light as it fell. The splash was tiny, barely a whisper against the water below. No. Lily's voice was pure panic. She leaned over the well's edge, staring down into the darkness like she was watching her life disappear into the depths. What was it? I have to get it back. Lily grabbed the rope, but Ruth caught her wrist. That well's 40 feet deep. You go down there, you're not coming back up. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Ruth tied the bucket to a fresh length of rope from the barn. It took 3 tries to hook whatever had fallen, the metal scraping against stone as she worked it back to the surface. When it finally emerged, dripping and tarnished, Ruth saw what had made Lily so desperate. A silver locket, small and delicate, hanging from a thin chain that had somehow survived years of wear. Ruth wiped it dry with her apron and held it up to the light. There was an inscription on the back, etched in careful script that time had tried to erase. To my beloved Margaret, W.B., 1891. The words hit Ruth like cold water. W.B. Wade Brennan. And 1891 was 23 years ago, long before Wade had become sheriff, back when he was just another young man with big plans and bigger appetites. Lily. The girl was crying now, silent tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. That was my mother's. Margaret. Yes. Margaret Brennan. Lily's face crumpled like paper in a fire. She wasn't Brennan when she died. She was Margaret Calloway. Like me. Ruth's world tilted. Margaret Brennan had been Wade's first wife, the one who supposedly died in childbirth years ago. But if Lily was 19 and Margaret had died in childbirth, then the numbers didn't add up. Nothing added up. When did your mother die? 5 years ago. Winter of 1896. Ruth remembered that winter, remembered the whispers in town about Margaret Brennan taking sick so sudden, how she wasted away in a matter of weeks, how Wade had grieved so publicly, wearing black for months and speaking about the tragedy of losing a wife in the prime of her life. She didn't die in childbirth. No, but that's what Wade told everyone. Wade tells a lot of things that aren't true. Lily took the locket from Ruth's hands and held it like it might break. Her fingers traced the inscription with the careful touch of someone who had memorized every line. Tell me about her. She was beautiful, dark hair like mine, but her eyes were green. She sang when she cooked. Old songs her grandmother taught her. She was scared all the time, but she tried not to let me see it. Scared of what? Of him. Of what he'd do if he found us. Ruth sat down hard on the well's stone edge. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture she didn't want to see. You were hiding. For 4 years, we lived in boarding houses and rented rooms, moving every few months. She cleaned houses and took in washing. I helped when I could. But he found you. He always said he would. Said there wasn't anywhere we could go, that he wouldn't find us eventually. What happened when he did? Lily's voice got smaller, like she was 14 again and watching her world end. He came to the boarding house in Millerville with 2 deputies, said she was his lawful wife, and I was his property by extension. The landlady tried to argue, but you don't argue with a badge. He brought you both back. Mama fought him. She tried to tell people in town what he really was, but who's going to believe a runaway wife over a sheriff? He locked us in the house and told everyone she'd taken sick with grief over running away. Ruth felt something cold settle in her stomach. She didn't take sick. No, she took poison. Found it in his desk drawer and swallowed it all at once while he was at work. Left me a note saying she was sorry, but it was the only way to keep him from hurting me worse. Jesus. He told everyone she died of consumption, had the doctor write it up that way. Then he shipped me off to McKinnon's the next week. Said I needed to learn what happened to girls who didn't appreciate what they had. Ruth stood up and started pacing. The locket caught the sun as Lily held it, throwing tiny reflections across the ground like scattered stars. He's been looking for you since you ran. I know. He's not going to stop. I know that too. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid you'd send me back. Everyone always sends me back eventually. Ruth stopped pacing and looked at the girl sitting by the well, holding the only thing she had left of her mother, 19 years old and already carrying more grief than most people collected in a lifetime. I'm not everyone. No. And I think it's time Wade Brennan learned that some things can't be owned. Lily looked up at her with those creekwater eyes, hope flickering like a candle flame in a storm. What are we going to do? Ruth's smile was sharp as broken glass. We're going to tell the truth. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the valley, surrounded by pine trees that whispered secrets in the wind. Ruth had hitched the wagon while Lily sat silent in the kitchen, staring at the locket like it might tell her something new. The ride took an hour, long enough for the morning mist to burn off and leave the world sharp-edged and unforgiving. Pine Valley Cemetery was older than the town itself, filled with headstones that marked the dreams and failures of 3 generations. Ruth knew most of the names carved in granite and marble. Her own family had been laid to rest here for 50 years, including Thomas, whose grave she visited every Sunday with wildflowers and whispered apologies. I've never been here before. Lily's voice was small as they walked between the weathered monuments. Her shoes crunched on gravel that hadn't been raked in months. Never? He wouldn't let me come to the funeral, said I wasn't family anymore. Ruth felt anger rise in her chest like bile. Wade Brennan had stolen this girl's mother and then stolen her chance to say goodbye. Which section? I don't know. The newer graves, I think. They found Margaret's headstone near the back, where the cemetery expanded into land that had once been farmland. The stone was simple gray granite, nothing fancy, with words carved in plain block letters. Margaret Brennan, beloved wife and mother, 1871 to 1896, at rest in the arms of the Lord. Lily stood frozen, staring at the lie carved in stone. Beloved wife. I'm sorry. Mother. She was a mother, but she was never a beloved wife. Not to him. Ruth watched Lily kneel beside the grave, her fingers tracing the letters like she was trying to memorize them, or maybe erase them. Tell me what really happened. We ran when I was 10. Middle of the night, took nothing but the clothes on our backs and what little money Mama had hidden in the coffee tin. Where did you go? Everywhere. Boarding houses, rented rooms, sometimes slept in church basements when we couldn't afford anything else. Mama worked cleaning houses, taking in laundry, anything that paid cash. 4 years is a long time to stay hidden. We thought we were safe. Got comfortable in Tucson, found a nice boarding house run by a widow who didn't ask too many questions. Mama was working for a doctor's family, and I was helping in the kitchen. Lily pulled a dead flower from the grave and crumbled it between her fingers. Then one morning I woke up and heard Mama screaming downstairs. He found you. He found us in Tucson, dragged her back. How? 2 deputies with him, both carrying iron. The boarding house lady tried to argue, said we'd paid our rent fair and square. Wade showed her his badge and said he was retrieving stolen property. Ruth's hands clenched into fists. What did he do to her? Same thing he did to every woman who tried to leave him. Which was what? Made sure they never tried again. The wind picked up, sending pine needles skittering across the graveyard like tiny bones. Ruth pulled her shawl tighter and tried to imagine Margaret Brennan, a woman she'd seen maybe a dozen times in town but never really knew. She died within a week of coming back. That's what people said. Consumption. People said a lot of things that weren't true. Mama didn't have consumption. She had bruises that went bone deep and a spirit that finally broke. You think he killed her? I know he did. Maybe not with his hands, but he killed her just the same. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Thomas and the questions he'd been asking before he died. Questions about Margaret Brennan and why a healthy woman would waste away so fast. Questions about Wade and the pattern of accidents that seemed to follow him like a shadow. My husband was asking about your mother before he died. Lily looked up sharply. What kind of questions? The dangerous kind. Thomas was a quiet man, but he noticed things, like how many of Wade's problems seemed to solve themselves with convenient accidents. What did he find out? I don't know. But I know he was planning to talk to the territorial marshal about Wade. Then the mine collapsed. You think Wade killed him too? Ruth nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place like cards in a rigged game. Thomas knew that mine better than anyone. Worked it for 20 years, knew every support beam and every weak point. There's no way those supports rotted through without him noticing. So Wade made sure he couldn't tell anyone what he knew. Same way he made sure your mother couldn't tell anyone what she knew. They stood in silence, 2 women mourning the dead and hating the living. The sun was climbing higher now, but the cemetery felt cold, like winter had settled into the bones of the earth and refused to leave. How many others you think there are? I don't know. But I think we're going to find out. Lily stood and brushed the dirt from her knees. Her face was set in hard lines that made her look older than 19. How? Thomas hid things. Papers, letters, evidence he was collecting. I never looked through it all after he died, was too grief-struck to care. But now I think maybe I should. Where? Root cellar behind the house. He built a false wall back there, thought I didn't know about it. What if we find something? Then we take it to someone who can do something about it. Like who? Wade's got the whole county in his pocket. Ruth's smile was sharp as winter wind. Then we go outside the county. They walked back to the wagon in silence, leaving Margaret Brennan to rest under her lying headstone, but Ruth could feel the dead woman's spirit following them. Hungry for justice that was 23 years overdue. Lily, what? When we get back, I want you to tell me everything, every detail you remember about your mother's death, about Wade, about anyone who might have helped him. Why? Because the dead deserve better than lies carved in stone. You really think we can bring him down? Ruth looked back at the cemetery one last time, thinking about Thomas and Margaret and all the other ghosts that haunted these hills. I think it's time to find out. The root cellar smelled like earth and secrets. Ruth lit the oil lamp while Lily held the wooden door open, letting afternoon light spill down the stone steps. Thomas had built this place himself, carving it into the hillside behind the house where the ground stayed cool even in summer. Ruth had stored preserves here, root vegetables, anything that needed to be kept from spoiling. She'd never thought to look behind the shelves. There, Ruth pointed to the back wall where Thomas had stacked empty crates to hide his work. Behind them, a section of stone had been carefully mortared to look like the rest, but the joints were newer, cleaner. Thomas had been thorough, but he'd also been in a hurry. They moved the crates in silence, stacking them by the stairs. The false wall came apart easily once Ruth found the loose stones. Behind it was a cavity filled with papers, photographs, and a wooden box that had once held tobacco. What's all this? Lily held the lamp while Ruth pulled out the first bundle. Letters tied with string, some in handwriting she recognized as Margaret's, others in different hands, all women, all telling similar stories. Evidence. Ruth untied the string around Margaret's letters. The paper was yellowed with age, but the words were clear enough. Margaret had documented everything. Dates, times, injuries, a careful record of what Wade Brennan did to his wife when nobody was watching. She wrote it all down. Smart woman. Knew someday someone would need proof. Lily was looking through the photographs, black and white images that made her face go pale in the lamplight. These are bruises. Margaret's? Some of them, but not all. Ruth took the photographs and felt her stomach turn. Pictures of women with blackened eyes, split lips, handprint bruises around their throats. Some she recognized from town. Others were strangers. How many women? I don't know, but look at this. Lily held up a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Woman Dies in Riding Accident." The article was about Sarah Brennan, Wade's second wife, who had fallen from her horse and broken her neck 2 years after Margaret's death. Sarah. You knew her? Saw her around town. Pretty girl, maybe 22. Married Wade 6 months after Mama died. Ruth found more clippings in the box. Another headline, "Sheriff's Wife Takes Own Life." This one was about Helen Brennan, Wade's third wife, who had supposedly hanged herself in the barn last winter. How many more? I don't know, but I know why he wants me back. Why? Because I'm the only witness left. I saw what he did to Mama. Ruth sat back on her heels, pieces falling into place like dominoes in a line. Wade hadn't just killed Margaret. He'd been killing wives for years, using his badge to cover the crimes, relying on people's willingness to believe that accidents happened and desperate women took their own lives. What exactly did you see? The last night, Mama was locked in their bedroom, had been for 3 days. I was supposed to be sleeping, but I heard her crying, went to the door and looked through the keyhole. Lily's voice got smaller, like she was 14 again, and watching through that keyhole. He had his hands around her throat. She was fighting, but she was so weak from not eating. He was telling her this was what happened to wives who embarrassed him. She fought back, tried to, scratched his face, left marks he had to explain away later, said he'd been thrown from his horse. Ruth found more letters in the box, these in different handwriting, Sarah's letters documenting the same pattern of escalating violence. Helen's, too, written in a shaky hand that spoke of fear and desperation. Thomas was building a case. Against Wade. Look at this. Ruth held up a letter addressed to the territorial marshal. Thomas had written it, but never sent it, detailing his suspicions about Wade's pattern of convenient accidents and dead wives. He was going to turn Wade in. That's why the mine collapsed. Wade found out somehow. How? Same way he finds out everything in this county. People talk. Lily was going through more papers, finding witness statements from women who had worked with Margaret, Sarah, and Helen, laundresses who had seen the bruises, shopkeepers who had noticed the way the women flinched when their husband's name was mentioned. All these women knew. Women always know? Question is whether anyone listens. Why didn't they speak up? Who were they going to tell? Wade was the law. Still is. Ruth found Margaret's last letter, written the day before she died. Her handwriting was shaky, desperate. Listen to this. If something happens to me, know that I did not take my own life. I would never leave Lily alone with him. If I die, it is because Wade Brennan murdered me, and I pray someday someone will have the courage to make him pay. The words hung in the lamplight like a curse waiting to be fulfilled. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She knew. She knew, and she made sure someone else would know too. Why didn't Thomas do something sooner? Maybe he tried. Maybe he was being careful, building a case that would stick. Or maybe he was scared. Ruth looked at her husband's careful handwriting, his methodical documentation of Wade's crimes. Thomas had been many things, but he hadn't been a coward. No, he was planning something. Look at this. She held up a map of the county with locations marked in red ink. The mine where Thomas died, the places where Sarah and Helen had their accidents, Margaret's grave, other locations Ruth didn't recognize. He was tracking Wade's movements, trying to prove the accidents weren't accidents. That's why you were at McKinnon's. Lily nodded, her face grim in the lamplight. Only place in town Wade couldn't touch me publicly. Too many witnesses, too many people watching. He could have me dragged out. But then people would ask questions. So you were hiding in plain sight. For 4 years, until I couldn't anymore. What changed? New girl came to work at the saloon. Reminded me too much of Mama when she was young. Wade started sniffing around her, asking questions. Ruth understood. Lily had run not just to save herself, but to keep Wade from claiming another victim. You think he's already married her? Don't know, but if he hasn't, he will. That's what he does. Ruth began packing the evidence back into the box, her mind racing. Thomas had died before he could expose Wade, but his work was still here. The truth was still here. What are we going to do with all this? We're going to finish what Thomas started. How? Same way Margaret wanted it finished. We're going to make Wade Brennan pay. The hoofbeats came at sunset, when the light was dying and shadows stretched long across the valley. Ruth was in the kitchen cleaning Thomas's rifle, checking the action and counting cartridges. Lily was mending a torn shirt by the window when she went rigid. He's back. Ruth set the rifle aside and moved to the window. Wade Brennan sat his horse like a man who owned everything he could see, but this time he wasn't alone. A folded paper was tucked into his vest pocket, and his hand rested easy on his gun belt. Stay calm. Easy for you to say. Wade dismounted and tied his horse to the same post as before. His boots rang against the porch steps with the confidence of a man who knew the law was on his side. When the knock came, it was harder this time, more insistent. Ruth opened the door, but kept the chain latched. Wade. Ruth. I need to speak with the girl. What girl? The one you're harboring. Lily Calloway. Wade pulled the paper from his pocket and unfolded it with theatrical precision. Got a warrant here for her arrest. What's the charge? Theft. She stole money from McKinnon's saloon before she ran off. Ruth's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. That's a lie, and you know it. Law doesn't care what I know. Law cares what I can prove. How much money? $50. $50 would buy this whole house. You think anyone's going to believe a saloon girl had access to that kind of money? Wade's smile was sharp as a blade. People believe what the badge tells them to believe. From behind Ruth, Lily's voice came clear and steady. I'm not going anywhere with you. Wade leaned against the doorframe, trying to see past Ruth into the house. That's not really your choice, girl. You're under arrest. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Like you made it hard for my mother? For Sarah? For Helen? The words hit Wade like a slap. His easy confidence flickered, and for a moment, Ruth saw something dangerous move behind his eyes. What did you say? Lily stepped into view, standing beside Ruth with her chin raised and her hands steady. You heard me. Margaret Calloway, Sarah Brennan, Helen Brennan. Want me to keep going? Your mother died of consumption. Natural causes. My mother died because you put your hands around her throat and squeezed until she stopped fighting. Wade's face went pale, then red. That's a serious accusation, girl. It's not an accusation, it's testimony. From who? You were a child. Old enough to look through a keyhole. Old enough to see you murder her. Ruth felt the air change, felt the moment tip from bluff to something deadly. Wade's hand moved closer to his gun. You're coming with me. Now. No, I got a legal warrant. You got a piece of paper with lies written on it. Wade stepped forward, and Ruth slammed the door shut. She could hear him on the other side, his voice muffled but angry. Open this door, Ruth. Don't make me break it down. Ruth grabbed the rifle and worked the lever, chambering around. The metallic sound was loud in the small house. You touch that door, and I'll put a hole in you big enough to ride a horse through. You're interfering with a lawful arrest. I'm protecting my home from a murderer. Ruth opened the door again, this time without the chain. The rifle was pointed at Wade's chest, and her finger was on the trigger. Back up. Wade raised his hands but didn't move. Easy now, Ruth. No need for violence. Tell that to Margaret. Tell that to Sarah and Helen. You don't know what you're talking about. We know more than you think. Something in Ruth's voice made Wade's eyes narrow. What's that supposed to mean? Means your husband wasn't as careful as he thought he was. Ruth's smile was cold as winter wind. Thomas kept records, pictures, letters. Everything you thought was buried. Wade's composure cracked completely. His hand dropped toward his gun, but Ruth's rifle was already trained on his heart. I wouldn't. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to bet your life on that? Behind Ruth, Lily stepped into full view. She was holding Margaret's locket in one hand and a bundle of letters in the other. "Recognize these." Wade stared at the letters like they were rattlesnakes. "Where did you get those?" "From Mama. She wrote down everything you did to her. Every bruise, every threat, every time you put your hands on her. Those letters don't prove anything. They prove you're a liar. They prove Sarah and Helen didn't have accidents. They prove you've been murdering wives for years." Wade took a step back, his confidence finally broken. "You think anyone's going to believe the word of a runaway saloon girl over a sheriff? Maybe not, but they might believe a territorial marshal." Ruth's words hit home. Wade's face went white. "You wouldn't dare. Already sent the letter. Should be in the Capitol by now." It was a lie, but Wade didn't know that. He looked from Ruth to Lily and back again, calculating odds that were getting worse by the minute. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. I'll be back with deputies, legal authority. You do that. Come back with all the deputies you want, but you better make sure they're ready to die for your lies." Wade backed down the porch steps, his hand still hovering near his gun. "You got until morning to see reason. Turn the girl over, and maybe I'll forget about the interference charge. And if we don't, then I'll come back and take her. And anyone who gets in my way will share her fate." Ruth kept the rifle trained on him until he mounted his horse. "Wade," he turned in the saddle, "you come back here. You better come shooting, because I sure as hell will be." Wade spurred his horse and rode away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Ruth didn't lower the rifle until the hoofbeats faded completely. "How long you think we have?" "Until dawn, maybe." "He'll need time to round up men willing to kill for him." "What do we do?" Ruth closed and barred the door. "We get ready." "For what?" "War." Lily looked out the window where Wade had disappeared. "You think he'll really come back?" "I know he will. Question is whether we'll be ready for him." Ruth checked the rifle again, then started gathering ammunition from Thomas's hiding places. "Help me move the furniture. We're going to make this house a fortress." "You really think we can win?" Ruth looked at the young woman who had finally found the courage to stand up to her tormentor. "We're not going to win, Lily. We're going to survive. And sometimes that's the same thing." They worked through the night, preparing for the dawn that would bring Wade Brennan and whatever men he could muster to his cause. The house filled with the sound of moving furniture and loading weapons. Two women preparing to make their final stand against a man who thought he owned them both. They'd moved the heavy table against the front door and stacked Thomas's tools behind it. The windows were shuttered tight, with gaps just wide enough to see out and shoot through. Ruth had placed loaded rifles at 3 different positions, while Lily kept watch from the kitchen window with Thomas's pistol in her hands. The waiting was the hardest part. Ruth knew Wade would come with the dawn, but the night stretched endless and dark. Every sound outside could be hoofbeats. Every shadow could hide a man with a gun. They took turns sleeping, one always awake, always listening. There, Lily's whisper cut through the pre-dawn quiet. Ruth moved to the window and saw them. 3 riders approaching slowly, Wade in the lead, with 2 deputies flanking him. They spread out as they got closer, surrounding the house like hunters cornering prey. "Wade Brennan." Wade's voice carried across the yard, amplified by the morning stillness. "Send the girl out, and nobody else needs to get hurt." Ruth positioned herself at the front window, rifle ready. "Go to hell, Wade. Last chance, Ruth. We're coming in either way." "Then come on, but you better dig your graves first." Wade dismounted and motioned to his deputies. They began moving toward the house, using the barn and outbuildings for cover. Ruth tracked them through the gaps in the shutters, finger on the trigger. That's when she heard them. More hoofbeats. Coming fast from the eastern road. Wade heard them too, turning in his saddle to see who was approaching uninvited to his private war. 6 riders crested the hill, moving at a gallop. Ruth saw the federal marshal's badge catch the early morning light, saw the woman riding beside him with dark hair that looked familiar, Margaret's sister Anna, older now but unmistakable, leading the federal marshal straight into Wade's trap. Anna. Lily breathed the name like a prayer. Anna had gotten the message Ruth sent, had believed the evidence Thomas collected, had brought the law that mattered more than a county sheriff's badge. The marshals spread out as they approached, rifles ready, surrounding Wade and his deputies with practiced efficiency. The lead marshal, a tall man with silver hair and eyes like winter, called out in a voice that carried the weight of federal authority. "Wade Brennan, you're under arrest for murder." Wade's laugh was harsh in the morning air. "You got no jurisdiction here, Marshal. Federal crimes, federal jurisdiction." Anna rode closer, and Ruth could see the family resemblance to Margaret. Same dark eyes, same stubborn set to her jaw. "We know what you did to my sister, to all of them. Your sister died of consumption. My sister died because you murdered her, just like you murdered Sarah and Helen." The marshal had dismounted now, moving toward Wade with careful steps. "We've been tracking a pattern of suspicious deaths involving county sheriffs across 3 territories. Your name keeps coming up, Sheriff." Wade's hand moved toward his gun, but he was surrounded now, outnumbered 6-3. "This is all lies. Stories made up by a runaway saloon girl. Stories backed up by evidence, letters, photographs, witness testimony." Ruth opened the front door, keeping her rifle trained on Wade as she stepped onto the porch. Lily followed, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. "Tell them about Thomas Cameron, Wade." Wade's face went pale as he saw the women emerge from the house. "Mining accident. Everyone knows that. Thomas found out about you, was building a case, so you had him killed." "Prove it." Anna held up a bundle of papers. "We can." "Your mine foreman talked. For the right price, he was willing to admit he planted the charges that brought down that tunnel." Wade's composure finally shattered. His hand dropped to his gun, but Ruth was faster. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. "You should have stayed down, Wade." Blood soaked through Wade's shirt as he struggled to rise. His deputies had their hands in the air, surrounded by federal guns they couldn't hope to match. "This isn't over." Wade's voice was weak but full of venom. He pulled a hidden derringer from his boot and pointed it at Lily. "If I'm going down, I'm taking her with me." Ruth's second shot took him center mass, dropping him flat on his back in the dirt. The derringer fell from nerveless fingers, unfired. Wade coughed, blood speckling his lips as he tried to speak. "Thomas." The name came out as a whisper. Ruth knelt beside him, keeping her rifle close. "What about Thomas?" "I killed him. Had to. He was getting too close." "And Margaret." "Strangled her. Couldn't have her telling people what kind of man I really was." "Sarah?" "Helen." "Pushed Sarah's horse, hanged Helen myself, and made it look like suicide." Wade's voice was getting weaker, but he kept talking, as if confessing might earn him some kind of twisted absolution. "They all tried to leave me. Couldn't let that happen. What would people think?" Lily stepped closer, looking down at the man who had destroyed her family. "Why are you telling us this?" Wade's smile was blood-stained and terrible. "Because now you'll have to live with it. All of it. The truth of what I was. We already knew what you were." "Did you? Did you know I killed 12 women across 3 counties? Did you know your precious Thomas begged for his life before I had him crushed?" Ruth's hands tightened on her rifle, but Wade was already dying. His breathing was shallow, labored. "Did you know I was going to marry that new girl at McKinnon's next month? Pretty little thing. Reminds me of Margaret when she was young." Anna stepped forward, her face hard as stone. "Not anymore, you're not." Wade tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough that sprayed blood across the dirt. "Doesn't matter. There's always another sheriff, always another badge, always another man who knows how to keep women in their place." "Not in my territory." The federal marshal's voice was final as judgment. Wade looked up at him with eyes that were already going glassy. "You think you can stop it? You think arresting one man changes anything? I think stopping you is enough for today." Wade's breathing stopped. His eyes stared up at the morning sky, seeing nothing. The man who had terrorized 3 counties for years was dead, killed by a widow protecting a girl who refused to stay silent. Ruth stood slowly, her rifle still smoking. Around them, the federal marshals were taking Wade's deputies into custody. Anna was comforting Lily, holding her the way an aunt should hold a niece who had been through hell and survived. "It's over." The marshal looked at Ruth with respect in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am, it is." Ruth looked down at Wade's body one last time, then walked back to her house. There would be questions later, paperwork, testimony. But for now, the sun was rising over a valley that was finally free of Wade Brennan's shadow. "Lily." "Yes?" "Welcome home." The sign by the front gate was simple, painted in white letters on weathered wood. "Cameron House, Sanctuary for Women." Ruth had hung it there 3 months ago, after the third woman had knocked on her door asking for the kind of help that couldn't be found anywhere else. Lily stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as two new arrivals walked up the path. Sisters by the look of them, carrying everything they owned in carpet bags that had seen better days. The older one had bruises on her arms that were trying to heal. The younger one kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to follow. "They're here." Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the door. This was the part that never got easier, seeing the fear in women's eyes when they first arrived. The way they flinched at sudden sounds. The way they apologized for taking up space. The way they clutched their belongings like someone might steal them back. "Welcome to Cameron House." Ruth's voice was warm but steady as she opened the door. The older sister stepped forward, her chin raised despite the fear Ruth could see in her eyes. "We heard you might have room." "We always have room." Lily appeared beside Ruth, and the sisters' faces showed recognition. Most women in 3 counties knew about Lily Cameron now, the girl who had stood up to Sheriff Wade Brennan and lived to tell about it. "I'm Lily. This is Ruth. You're safe here." The younger sister started crying then, the kind of tears that came from holding back fear for too long. Ruth guided them inside while Lily put the kettle on. They'd done this dance a dozen times now, and they'd gotten good at it. "How long can we stay?" "Long as you need. Some women pass through in a few days. Others have been here for months." "What's the cost?" "There isn't one, but if you want to help with the work, we won't say no." Ruth showed them to the room that used to be Thomas's study. Lily had cleared it out and added 2 beds, a washstand, and a window that looked out on the garden where nothing grew that could hurt you. "Anna Calloway sent us." The older sister spoke quietly like she was sharing a secret. Ruth nodded. Anna had built a network across 4 counties now, safe houses and trusted contacts who helped women escape situations that would have killed them if they'd stayed. Anna's good people. She said you'd understand. We understand. Later, when the sisters were settled and the house was quiet, Ruth and Lily sat on the front porch watching the sun set over the valley. The air was warm with late spring, and the smell of Lily's garden drifted on the evening breeze. 17 women so far. 18, counting the ones who just arrived. Think we're making a difference? Ruth looked at the young woman beside her, amazed at how much Lily had changed in 6 months. Gone was the frightened girl who had collapsed on these same porch steps. In her place sat Lily Cameron, a woman who had found her strength and decided to use it protecting others. "I think we're doing what we're supposed to do." "What's that?" "Breaking the cycle." Lily was quiet for a moment, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. "Think she'd be proud of us?" "Your mother. I think she'd be amazed at how strong you became. Strong enough to stay this time." Ruth reached over and squeezed Lily's hand. "Strong enough to make this place matter." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 women who had found family in each other when blood family had failed them. The evening was peaceful, the kind of peace that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. "I need to visit Thomas tomorrow. Want me to come with you?" "If you don't mind." "I never mind." Ruth made the trip to Pine Valley Cemetery every Sunday, carrying wildflowers from Lily's garden and stories about what they'd accomplished during the week. She talked to Thomas like he was still there, still listening, still proud of the way his hidden work had finally brought justice to the valley. The next morning, they rode to the cemetery together. Thomas's grave was well tended now, surrounded by flowers that Lily replanted every season. Ruth knelt beside the headstone and arranged the fresh blooms she'd brought. "The new school's doing well, Thomas. Lily's got 15 children learning their letters now. Some of them couldn't even spell their own names when they started. The old Saloon building had been closed the week after Wade's death. Too many bad memories, too many women who had suffered behind those painted walls. Now it housed desks and blackboards, books, and hope. Lily taught reading in the mornings and helped Ruth with the boarding house in the afternoons. McKinnon left town, heard he's selling snake oil somewhere down south now. Ruth touched the headstone, feeling the carved letters of Thomas's name under her fingertips. "Your evidence saved a lot of lives. Hope you know that." When they got back to the house, Lily went straight to her garden. She'd planted it in the exact spot where they'd burned Wade's badge and papers, turning the ashes of his corruption into soil that grew tomatoes and corn, beans and squash, everything that fed life instead of destroying it. Ruth found her there an hour later, kneeling between the rows with dirt on her hands and satisfaction on her face. Good harvest this year. Best yet. Ruth knelt beside her, pulling weeds and thinking about how strange life was. 6 months ago, this ground had been cursed with Wade's presence. Now it fed the women who came to them broken and helped them remember what it felt like to be whole. What should we plant next season? Something that lasts, something that spreads. They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher. Two women who had survived the worst men could do and chosen to build something better from the wreckage. Around them, the garden grew green and strong, proof that even the darkest soil could nurture new life if you were patient enough to tend it properly. The house behind them was full of women learning to be unafraid. The school in town was full of children learning to read. And somewhere in the valley, other women were making the choice to run toward safety instead of staying with danger. Margaret Calloway's daughter was finally home, and she was never leaving again.